This podcast is brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tires, batteries, and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. Thanks for downloading this McKay interview, which was recorded on the 23rd of May 2024. My guest is David Moran, formerly British ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and also to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Armenia, and Georgia. These days, he is UK advisor to the Caspian Policy Centre, a foreign policy think tank specialising in relations with Central Asia, the South Caucasus, and Turkey. We talk about the former states of the USSR and their present-day relationship with Russia. We also discuss Brexit because he was the British ambassador to Switzerland at the time of the vote in 2016, the result of which surprised most people, except him, as you will hear. And David reflects on the effects of climate change across parts of Eurasia and around the Caspian Sea. Of course, we discuss many other things too. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello everyone. Today we will look in detail at Eurasia, that vast middle area that bridges Europe and Asia, and also spend a little time talking about the United Kingdom. My guest makes a return to the McKay interview after quite a few years. He was a very popular British ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein between 2014 and 17. And prior to that he was ambassador to Uzbekistan and then ambassador to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and after Switzerland he was ambassador to Georgia and to Armenia. David Moran is visiting Geneva to make an important address to the British-Swiss Chamber of Commerce, the Forum Suisse de Politique Internationale, and the British Residents Association of Switzerland, and we're here in the comfort of the Warwick Geneva shortly before he takes the stage. David, welcome back. The last time we talked with the microphones in front of us was at the beginning of your posting in 2014. It's 10 years. It's hard to believe. And at that time, we looked at the UK specifically through the lens of Winston Churchill's history of the English-speaking peoples. But since then, your diplomatic career has taken you to the Caspian region, and now you've recently retired after 38 years in the Foreign Service. Welcome to the McKay interview.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you again, David.
Good to see you, and good to be here.
Of course, I realise that you have to be discreet, even though you're no longer on His Majesty's government's payroll, but I hope you can give some deeper insights into some of the complex issues where your knowledge is certainly greater than mine and greater than many of us listening to you. You've been the UK's government's man in Central Asia or the Caspian region for many years. And since February 2022, we've had war on the border of Ukraine and Russia. In fact, more than that, Russia's been illegally occupying Ukraine's sovereign territory since it invaded Crimea in 2014. The so-called free world, the West, did little or nothing at the time. A UN Security Council member has attacked and invaded a sovereign country without provocation. And that conflict is now 2 years old. In fact, it's 10 years old. Thousands, soldiers, civilians and children have died or been displaced. Cities, towns and villages have been destroyed by the Russians. And the conflict seems to be going nowhere, if actually tipping slightly at the moment in Russia's favour. The West, in particular the USA, by its behaviour in delaying the recently approved shipment of arms, appears to want Ukraine to win, but does not want Russia to lose. What's your assessment, David?
Well, you've painted a very vivid picture, and much of it rings true to me. I think 2024 was always going to be a difficult year, particularly after the counter-offensive that Ukraine attempted didn't come off in the way that it did, or they wanted to, rather. And there have been time lags for equipment delivery, ammunition, etc. So from what I understand, 2024 was a sort of window of opportunity for the Russians if they could regroup and learn from the mistakes that they made in the first year. And that's rather what they've done. 2025, if Ukraine could have made more impact in the counteroffensive, that would have been a better year for them. But now they're just having to deal with a difficult situation. And politics in America, in Europe, hesitancy or outright resistance to continue to provide money and arms is something that's going to be critical to what happens in the next year. And of course, the US election will decide a lot.
And tell me, how do the countries in that region that you know so well react? I mean, they were all part of the USSR. And even before, I think, I don't know my history that well of that part of the world, but I think some of them were even part of the old Russian Empire. Do they see Russia's behavior today as imperialistic, or are they more sympathetic to Russia than to Ukraine? Do they welcome what is going on? I have in mind in particular Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, as well as Armenia, and we'll come to Georgia a little bit later.
Well, for the countries in the region, I mean, Russia is a fact. It's been part of their lives for, as you say, many generations. They didn't just see the 2014 annexation of Crimea. They saw the Georgian War in 2008. And they recognize that Russian foreign policy is all about Russian national interest and an ambition, particularly with Putin, to re-establish Russia's status as a superpower alongside China and the US. So Kazakhstan in particular is aware that Russian nationalists regard the northern part of their country, including their capital, Astana, as part of Greater Russia.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when they look at what happened in Georgia and now in Ukraine, they are aware that they are not entirely without risk either, and the borders are open. There are structures like the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a Russian version of NATO in a way.
What is it called again?
It's the Collective Security Treaty Organization.
I wasn't aware of that.
And the Eurasian Economic Union, which again was it was a Kazakh idea. The Economic Union. The Russians had more sort of political ambition, and the Kazakhs and some other countries are part of that. So there's a lot of links even now. And the Kazakh president, the previous one, had good relations with Putin. So Putin didn't have to worry, I think, about any red lines being broken. The new Kazakh ambassador, recently new, has made it clear that he's not supporting all of Russia's foreign policy's moves, and that's a clear signal. But at the same time, he goes to Russia for meetings.
This is Tokayev, who used to be here in
correct,
Geneva. Right,
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
He's
right.
been on this show, in fact, when he was Director General.
Right. Okay. So, yes, his diplomatic experience is probably helpful in this regard.
He was very popular here.
Yeah. So he even when there was some unrest in Kazakhstan early on in his tenure, he called in the Russians to help to calm things again. So you've got links, but you've also got a wish to have options, and the Kazakhs always talked about a multi-vector foreign policy, which meant we don't just have one partner or two. We look in all directions, and it shouldn't threaten any of these people.
And this must be a difficult question for you to answer because, you know, in your position as having been ambassador, you're living in a very high level of the society. But what do you get the sense in those countries that the ordinary people, or are they essentially agrarian people rather than urban people who just want to get on with life like most people? I mean, what's their aspiration in the countries of these former republics?
Well, yeah, there's a number of things here. Of course, as ambassadors, we can't really do our job unless we get out there and talk to people across the country and get a feel for cities, countries, etc. And these countries, many of them are both big and varied. It depends partly on age. Most young people, for them, the USSR is ancient history. It's 35 years ago. And since the demographics are such that average age is quite low in most of these countries, you know, they see the world through what it's become. In Central Asia, there's been quite a lot of nation building, you know, creating or reviving the cultures that they had
You mean
before.
language, institutions, the flag, music?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Well,
when you say
some of it is new, like the flag, but some of it was suppressed under the Soviets, like their languages, and that has come back, and in some cases, I mean, it's too in a short answer, it's difficult to describe, but in Central Asia, they largely succeeded in implanting an identity, a sense of identity in the five countries. Slightly easier in the South Caucasus because their cultures were ancient and sustained throughout that whole process, particularly Georgia.
Yeah.
But the Central Asians, it was quite a transition. Now, most people, young or old, want peace and prosperity. I mention peace because it's not just about the north and the east. You've got Afghanistan and Iran to the south. And prosperity, where it's about economic development. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have fossil fuels that they can draw upon. Kazakhstan also has uranium and a lot of critical minerals, which will be very useful for the future. But also they face enormous challenges. In Central Asia in particular, the impact of climate change is a lot harsher and longer than the average.
Your voice emphasizes it, David.
Yes.
Give me some examples.
Well, they've had very quick melting of glaciers, which for them that provides their drinking water and also agriculture, and it also provides the means of hydroelectric power. So, and that's not just for the countries themselves, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, but there's several other Central Asian countries that benefit from their water. When these glaciers are melting so quickly, it poses a real challenge at the same time when the Russians and the Chinese are taking more of the water from that flows from their countries, like the Volga, into the Caspian Sea for Russia, or in the case of China, into Kazakhstan's main lake. You also have Afghanistan. After years of not taking water effectively out of the river that feeds into the main Central Asian area of Uzbekistan, for example, They have a right to take some of the water, but they're building now a dam which could end up in lowering the water supply significantly in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So the Caspian Sea, for a variety of reasons, has falling sea levels. So there's dramatic changes, and this is just a water.
That must be quite worrying for the people. Must be very worrying.
Yeah. So they are very keen to work on climate change, and this is something that the West can, and the international community as a whole, can help. And there's a climate summit held in Azerbaijan this year, which will be a fantastic showcase for the region. Not just the challenges, but also the potential that they have. And what can be accomplished if the international community can work effectively.
Well, let's hope it's well attended. Listen, just to go back to Russia for a moment, but I want to move on to some other things. But I must ask you this, because I've asked it to a number of people who I've had on the show, military people and other strategists, who some of them say, as you know the argument, that Russia was treated badly by the West at the end, and in a way, Russia's behaviour today has been brought on by the West's insensitivity. Some after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Different answers, different opinions. What's your opinion, David? Has the West brought Russia's behaviour today on itself?
I always get a little bit irritated when this question pops up.
But it's a question that does pop
up. It's a natural question. But I think it's a false one, which is propagated by Putin more recently. It's not. I'm not saying that the West got everything right, but as the Soviet Union collapsed, the West mobilized itself to help Russia and the other countries integrate into world economic organizations, so the Bretton Woods Institution, the World Bank and the IMF, etc. They created technical assistance programs, and money was funneled into Russia.
As tangible as that?
Yes, yes. I mean, some of it went to international consultants, but the point is there was a big investment of time and opportunity. And I know this because I spent 3 years in Russia in the mid-90s as the local representative of Britain's technical assistance program for Russia and a couple of other countries. And we were working with, it was usually in the oblasts, in the regions, on small and medium enterprises, getting people out, perhaps in people who had worked in coal mines, for example, to set up their own small businesses. How do you do that? And working with the oblast administration this was a sort of practical, concrete help that we were giving. Now, when we came, a lot of Russians said, look, it's great you're here. You can really change things. And I remember saying to them, look, what we do, we hopefully does change a little bit, but what you're doing, nobody's had to do this size of transition before. What Russia will do, Russia's transition has to be done by Russians alone. So we gave them opportunities, and on the security side, we set up structures like NATO-Russia Council, etc. And we're open to all sorts of new ways of connecting with Russia in the 90s. Russia made some mistakes when they started to empower oligarchs. And then they had problems in the 90s of the collapse of the currency. So some of it was just, unfortunate circumstances. The West did say some things which irritated Russia. But the point is, Russia made its own fortune or failure.
So it's made its bed. It made its bed.
That's right. As I say, the West, perhaps could have done more or could have done differently, but to say that the West ruined Russia, it couldn't have happened even if we tried. Okay. And we did a lot to help Russia.
That's a good answer. My guest today is David Moran, the UK's ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein 10 years ago, and also a former British ambassador to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Georgia, and Armenia. I know it's a complicated story, but many of us don't know. Give us some sense of what's going on in Georgia today and why it's happening.
Well, Georgia's got a lot of young people, and most of them are looking towards a European future. And there has been in successive Georgian governments movements towards that, and there's been a reaction from the EU. There are people in Georgia who have connections with Russia, who, including very senior ones, who would like to have a closer relationship with Russia and want to limit the influence of civil society and of the West generally. Now that tension has led to the protests. Now there have been previous protests which changed the regime, the Rose Revolution.
I remember.
So. In Georgia, in that case, they're looking to a successful transition from a Russian point of view, or Russophiles in Georgia. They will look at that and say the sort of laws that the Russians have, foreign agents law, that control and limit the influence of civil society. That can be replicated in other countries in the region, and that's what the struggle is about.
That's the sticking point right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. We must talk about the UK. You've sort of finished your career with the UK Foreign Office and you've gone back to the UK, so you're in a much better position to have your finger on the pulse now than being the man in a foreign capital abroad. But I'm curious because I remember, because we got to know each other quite well, that you were in Bern at the time of the Brexit referendum, unlike most of us, probably looking the other way and quite surprised when we woke up the morning after to see that the country voted the other way. So did the British electorate shoot itself in the foot or even in both feet? Or can you see good coming out of separation from the European Union? And how would you sum up the balance sheet of Leave versus Remain today? I must say to our listeners, the day after Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has announced the date of the next general election. Go on, David. I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
Well, first of all, I wasn't surprised by the results on 2016. I was surprised by many things. 6 weeks after I arrived in Bern,
yes.
Having a vote on free movement by the Swiss, which immediately got the attention, rapt attention of Number 10. That surprised me, and it, not least because from then on, my 4-year posting, was about how the implications of what happens in Switzerland on British politics and vice versa.
I see. Okay.
So there was quite a lot of work to, politics will be politics, but try not to have each other's politics interfere in the democratic process of it. So there was quite a lot of work there just to explain what was happening in both countries, because sometimes it didn't work. It didn't come across correctly in the other country. In terms of I wouldn't say anything about the British electorate. It's a democratic choice,
yes,
and a perfectly legitimate decision. And I have people in my family who voted one way, and many who voted the others. So,
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too.
So the decision was made, and I wasn't surprised because I was back in the UK quite regularly, making speeches about the Swiss system and what had happened there. and what the Swiss model was like should we vote to leave. And the audience was interested in the options, but the vibe in the UK, and this is months before, was very clear, out. And taking back control, those two things really resonated more than any of the Remain things. So I remember being in a Swiss forum and having Gordon Brown talk about, shortly before the vote, saying, no, it's going to be all right. And apparently I was sitting next to a member of the Federal Council, and he said, "Your face tells a different story."
Your face? Or
mine.
Gordon Brown's
mine.
face? Your face, okay.
Yeah. He says, you think it's going to be out. And then I said, yeah. So, to make a long story short.
How do you see the balance sheet today?
Well, it largely depends on the next steps, because we've got through some rocky terrain, and some decisions we have to take, whether you're leave or remain or agnostic. You have to have a relationship with the continent next door.
450 million people.
But also Britain is in Europe.
Yes. Absolutely.
We're not in the Union. I don't know if we ever will be back in the Union, but we need whatever the new relationships the sort of legal arrangements that we have to have a close relationship. And funnily enough, that was in the early days what I was saying, using government lines about wanting the closest possible relationship with the EU, and that didn't happen for a while after the vote. And I hope that we work a lot more closely. And I think for Switzerland, it's been a model of how you can build on the current situation that you have, because the British-Swiss relationship and the arrangements that we have developed post-Brexit it is a model.
Absolutely, that's cool. And as you're aware of what's going on now, this MRA agreement is going through the process, and everybody's very happy with it.
Indeed.
Yeah, that was right. I just wanted to ask you before we wrap up, and I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how complicated or easy this is to answer, but I think we have to address it, is the influence of religion in the part of Eurasia that you've been working and living in. I mean, what's been your observation there? I mean, does it play a significant role in the way countries are governed, or are they fairly secular in that respect? Or is it just too simplistic a question?
Well, I think, first of all, there's two different religions that we're talking about. In South Caucasus, you've got Georgia and Armenia, which are Christian. In fact, Armenia was the first Christian country ever.
Very, very proud of it. Yeah.
And very proud of it, as you say. So that is an important part of the governance of those countries. It's quite it's relevant for things like LGBT. And also, discussions about non-governmental organizations, etc. So it can drive a sort of social conservatism, but it also there are many positive aspects of uniting some very small countries. And also the sense of national identity, because it's really sort of oven-baked, that sense of the two Orthodox churches. And there's an awful lot of wonderful culture and music as well that comes out of that.
It's a beautiful place, yeah.
In Central Asia, there has been worry about the influence of more extremist versions of Islam playing a part in local politics and indeed destabilizing and terrorizing in the region. It's been a priority there for most of the countries to have official versions of Islam that are more moderate. It also helps, I think, because their traditions were usually on the moderate side. So, except for one valley, the Fergana Valley, which is a blend of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, the Islam, the commitment to Islam is genuine and deep and high on the sort of barometer of impact in the politics.
I see. That's helpful just to understand that. Last question. It is a big question, but let's deal with it as best we can. It's about China. I've often wondered, because it's such a massive country beside another massive country, which is Russia. And I just wondered, again, in your experience, having lived there, what do you think China sees as it looks west and southwest, regarding the Belt and Road Initiative and all the other issues surrounding the second biggest economy in the world?
Sure.
Just give us your impressions of China.
Well, yeah, they have extended infrastructure through the Central Asian region, and that's in their interest, and for a large part, it's been in the interest of Central Asia as well. It's largely a positive relationship, but there are some tensions in Central Asia related to China. I mean, the most obvious one is Xinjiang, where in addition to Uyghurs, there are ethnic Kazakhs, and that's been tricky to handle. Central Asians are cautious about, but they don't forget that their ethnic brethren are next door, and some come across. The ambition is obviously economic dependence, and not necessarily in the sense of total dependence, but have the region integrated into a Chinese-inspired network, so that all roads and rails and belts go to Beijing, and that it strengthens their global hand and weakens the Western influence. I've read that in places like Africa that they've sort of cleaned up some of their acts when the people on the ground have perhaps not treated locals as well as they could.
Well, they just bring in all their own labourers, they even bring in their own truck drivers.
I think in some cases it may be changing because Beijing will be aware of the impact, and in that case. Or in Central Asia case, it's less of an issue because I don't think Central Asia ever granted that much sort of control. It's one of the things in Kazakhstan which can cause protests is talking about farmers talking about land sales to foreigners, which means Chinese. I recall during my time about a dozen years ago that there were some rumbles at that stage, and I noticed that in a normally quiet political environment, that was something that raised the temperature.
People didn't like that.
Ordinary Kazakhs.
Thank you, David. David, we're out of time, but thanks for making time for me and providing such valuable insights and thoughtful insights. It's been really helpful. My guest today has been David Moran, the UK advisor to the Caspian Policy Centre and former British ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and also to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Armenia, and Georgia. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the McKay Interview podcast, brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group. a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tyres, batteries and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. And you can find more podcasts on Anchor FM. Just Google Mackay Interview Anchor FM. Thanks again for listening.